Lorde wasn't supposed to step away. Not after that kind of success. Not after reaching a position most artists spend entire careers trying to get close to. Global recognition. Awards. A sound that cut through everything else. And it happened early. Too early to fully understand what came with it. Because success at that level doesn't just create opportunity. It creates expectations, structures, a system that begins to form around you. One that assumes you will continue. Release more, appear more, stay visible. And most artists follow that pattern. They build on momentum. They stay inside the system that elevated them. She didn't. There was no gradual slowdown, no clear transition, just a shift. From presence to absence. And that shift didn't come with explanation. No statement. No justification. Which leaves a different kind of question. Not about how she became successful, but why someone in that position would choose to step away from it. It didn't build slowly. It arrived all at once. A song released without the usual build-up. A voice that didn't follow the expected tone. A presence that didn't match the system it entered. Royals didn't just perform well. It displaced everything around it. Different sound. Different message. Different position. And that difference scaled. Quickly. From local recognition to global attention. Without transition. Without time to adjust. At that stage, most careers are still forming. Still testing direction. Still defining identity. Hers didn't get that phase. It skipped forward. Straight into visibility. Straight into expectation. Because once something reaches that level of impact, it stops being optional. It becomes a reference point. For the audience. For the industry. For everything that comes next. And that's where the shift begins. Not in the success itself, but in what follows it. Because when success arrives before identity is stable, it doesn't just elevate you. It defines you, before you have the chance to do it yourself. The success didn't stay isolated. It expanded. Into attention. Into expectation. Into a structure that didn't exist before. Because once something reaches that level, it stops being just a moment. It becomes a position. And positions come with rules. What to release next. How to sound. How to appear. And more importantly, how to continue. The system doesn't ask if you're ready. It assumes you are. Because from the outside, everything already looks complete. The success is there. The recognition is established. So the next step seems obvious. Repeat it. But repetition requires consistency. And consistency requires control. Control over sound. Control over image. Control over expectation. At that point, the freedom that created the breakthrough starts to narrow. Not visibly, but structurally. Because now every decision is measured against something that already worked. And anything that moves too far from that becomes a risk. That's where the pressure builds. Not from failure, but from the requirement to not fail. And when that becomes the condition, the system stops being supportive. It becomes restrictive. The shift didn't come with an announcement. It didn't need one. There was no moment where everything stopped. No visible break. Just less. Fewer appearances. Fewer releases. Less presence in a system that depends on visibility. And over time, that absence became noticeable. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't explained. In an environment where constant output is expected, silence stands out. Especially when it comes from someone who had every reason to continue. This wasn't a collapse. There was no failure forcing it. No external pressure strong enough to remove her from that position. Which leaves only one explanation. It was intentional. A decision to step outside. A system that was already forming around her. Because staying inside it would have required something specific. Consistency. Repetition. Alignment with expectations that were already set. And that comes at a cost. Not immediately, but over time. Identity becomes fixed. Direction becomes limited. And the space to change starts to disappear. Stepping away interrupts that process. Not by rejecting success, but by refusing to let it define what comes next. When she returned, it didn't feel like a continuation. It felt like a reset. Not in visibility, but in direction. The sound shifted. The tone changed. And the expectations that had formed earlier were no longer being followed. Melodrama didn't try to recreate what worked before. It moved inward, more controlled, more specific, less concerned with scale. And that choice changed how the return was perceived. Because it wasn't built for repetition. It was built for expression. Then came another shift. Solar power. Even further from expectation. Lighter. Quieter. Almost disconnected from what the system usually rewards. And the response reflected that. Mixed reactions. Uncertainty. Questions about direction. But the pattern remained consistent. She didn't adjust to correct it. She didn't move closer to what people expected. She stayed with the direction she chose. Which reinforces something that was already visible before. The return wasn't designed to regain position. It was designed to maintain control. At every stage, the same expectation was there. That success should continue. That visibility should increase. That momentum should be maintained. And in most cases, it is. Because the system rewards consistency, output, presence, repetition of what already works. That's how most careers are sustained. By staying inside the structure that created them. But that structure has limits. Not immediately, but over time. Because the more consistent something becomes, the less flexible it is. And once flexibility is gone, change becomes difficult. That's where most careers begin to narrow. Not because of failure, but because of stability. What makes Lorde different is not that she avoided success. It's that she didn't build her career around maintaining it. Every time the system started to define what came next, she stepped outside of it. Not permanently, but deliberately. And that creates a different pattern. One that doesn't depend on constant visibility or continuous output, but on timing, presence when it matters, absence when it doesn't, which changes how relevance works, not as something that has to be maintained constantly, but as something that can be reset. Again, and again, and again. She didn't stay relevant by doing more. She stayed relevant by knowing when to step away.